Welcome, Dr. Gabor Maté. We are so pleased to have you with us, and thank you for taking the time. We are going to talk about addiction and your book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which we have recently published in Norwegian. This is being printed as we speak. Good. This is, it's a truly important and, of course, highly relevant book, as addiction in different forms are increasingly becoming a concern for many people and for our society. So, first of all, what is addiction, and could you just give us a short definition?
First of all, just to say that as a physician, I worked for 12 years in North America's most concentrated area of drug use, which is the downtown east side of Vancouver, British Columbia, where we have thousands of people using heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, all kinds of opiates, alcohol, of course, and so on. And I've also noticed, though, that although those people are at the extreme end of the addiction spectrum, addictions run throughout society. And so let's define addiction. Addiction is manifested in any behavior in which a person finds temporary pleasure or relief and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences and cannot give up despite negative consequences. So pleasure, craving, relief in the short term, harm in the long term, inability to give it up. And I said any behavior. So it could be drugs like my patients in the downtown east side. Could also be sex, gambling, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, internet, cell phones, gaming, any number of behaviors, as long as there's craving and temporary pleasure and harm, and you don't give it up, that's an addiction. So look, let me turn this around, and this may or may not apply to you, but I'm not going to ask you any specifics, Christine, but according to that definition, have you ever had any kind of an addictive pattern in your life?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Most definitely.
All right. Well, let me ask you another question then, because this goes to the heart of what addiction is all about. I'm not going to ask you what you're addicted to or when, okay? I'm just going to ask you, what did it do for you in the short term? What was good about it? Not what was wrong with it. What was good about it in the short term that it gave you, that you wanted? What did you get from it?
Probably mostly an escape from, just from reality.
Okay. Okay. Now, who needs to escape from reality? Who needs to escape from anything? Somebody who's suffering. Nobody who's happy and grounded and free need to escape. So in other words, the addiction wasn't your primary problem. Your primary problem was some stress or distress or mental emotional suffering that made you want to escape. In other words, some kind of emotional pain. And that's my point about addiction, is that the real question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And what I'm saying is that all addictions are an attempt to escape from pain. And that pain, so rather addiction is not a disease that you inherited, and it's not a bad choice that you made. It was everybody's attempt, your attempt, my attempt, everybody's attempt to escape from pain. So my question is, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Yeah. And for that, you have to look at people's lives. It's a totally natural response to unnatural circumstances and to suffering, and usually it's to do with childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So that's my quick view of addiction.
And when you speak about childhood and trauma, you also speak a lot about attachment and authenticity.
So attachment and authenticity, that's a concept that I explain in the book, The Myth of Normal. But what happens to children is they have a fundamental need for what we call attachment. And attachment means being close to somebody for the sake of being taken care of, or to take care of the other, for that matter. Now, the human infant, all mammalian infants, rats, cats, dogs, elephants, whales, the infants have to be taken care of by the adults. Otherwise, they don't survive. So that attachment need to be close to somebody is not negotiable. But we have another need as well, which is to be authentic, to be connected to our emotions, to have those emotions validated and recognized and accepted by the caretaking adults in our lives. And that's essential as well, because if we're not connected to our gut feelings and our emotions and our bodies, we're lost. So we have that's what I call authenticity, is being connected to self. So we have these two needs: attachment on the one hand, authenticity on the other. What happens in a family when the child, if they're authentic, they're not accepted by the parents? For example, a child might be angry for whatever reason, a young child, a 2-year-old. And what if the parents punish the child for being angry, which often parents do in our society? What if, in a worst case scenario, the child is being abused? If a child is being abused, their natural feeling and impulse is to escape or to fight back. But what happens to a 3 or 4-year-old if they try to escape or fight back? It's impossible. So they have to push down the authenticity for the sake of attachment. That creates a lot of pain. And then one way to, not the only way to escape from the pain, but one way to escape from the pain is through addictions. So addiction is always rooted in trauma. Not everybody who's traumatized becomes addicted, but everybody who was addicted was traumatized.
What is it then about our modern society that creates addiction in such a massive scale that we see today?
So, look, Norway is I was read recently, it's one of the richest country in the world because of all the oil and so on, okay? And on the outside, it looks really good, you know? But I know people in Norway, I know therapists in Norway. There's a lot of suffering there. There's a lot of emotional suffering. There's a lot of child abuse. And even when there's no child abuse, in today's society, parents who love their kids and who do their best are not able to meet their needs because they're so stressed. This society separates people. There's increasing loneliness. There's more and more stress on parents. We evolved as human creatures. We evolved in small groups where there's a feeling of community and cooperation and collaboration and mutual support and togetherness. And those are our needs. Now, modern society has had amazing achievements in terms of science, technology, economics in certain ways, medicine, of course, but we've lost that sense of human connection, that sense of belonging. And that creates pain, that creates suffering and distress. There's an epidemic of loneliness in the Western world now. And again, addictions are ways, not the only way, but they're ways of dealing with that pain.
So one of your main aims, I believe, is to broaden our concept of addiction, as you mentioned before. Many of us think of drugs and alcohol and those kinds of substances when we hear the word addiction. But as you pointed out a moment ago, that there are so many other examples. And as you say, most of us, if not all of us, have some kind of addictive behavior at some point in our lives.
Yeah.
And why is it important for us to recognize all kinds of addictive behaviors, even the ones that seem innocent or socially acceptable?
Well, there's two reasons. Number one, if we're going to treat addiction properly, we have to understand its true nature. And as long as we just focus on the behavior, whether it's drugs or shopping or sex or whatever, we can't deal with the underlying problem, which is the pain and the trauma that people are trying to escape. But the reason we have to understand its broader implications and its broader manifestations is, number one, the so-called innocent addictions are not that innocent. Like in my own personal life, I've had two major ones. When I was a family physician, I was a workaholic. I always took on more work. Doesn't matter how busy I was. Now, that looked wonderful to everybody. They thought, what a great doctor, humane, he's available, he's always there for us. What did that mean for my family? It meant that I was neglecting my family for pursuing the work. I was also neglecting my own needs. So the more successful I became, the more depressed I became because I was totally ignoring my needs. So that's one addiction that I had. The other one was for shopping for classical compact discs. But that looks beautiful. He loves Mozart, he loves Beethoven, he loves Grieg, you know. But it meant, again, I was ignoring my own emotional needs and my family's to pursue this compulsive shopping habit. So these so-called innocent addictions, they're not innocent. They're not innocent at all. And then the second reason is that we tend to, as a society, and I don't know what it's like in Norway, but I know what it's like in Canada. We look on drug addicts as particularly bad people who made stupid choices, who deserve to be excluded, ostracized, and punished. Well, if we actually look at ourselves a bit more honestly, we see that we're not that different. We just have to be more fortunate. You know, we have to be have the so-called respectable addictions. And maybe we weren't as traumatized, maybe we weren't as hurt as they were, but that's the only difference. So seeing it in this broad sense, it removes the tendency to judge other people and to make ourselves feel superior, which is very toxic.
Yeah. You write that the part of the brain which is needed to break the addictive behavior is the part that often is most damaged in the first place, both by the addiction itself and also by the wounds that underlie the addiction. And that this might be part of the reason why addiction is so hard to break. Can you explain a little bit about what happens to the brain?
Sure. I'm impressed by how closely you understood my message, by the way, because it's not necessarily an easy one. But if you look at the parts of the brain where addictions develop, they're the same parts of the brain where love develops and where vitality and aliveness develops. So if you look at, for example, opiates like heroin or fentanyl, codeine, morphine, they work in the brain because we have receptors, molecules which receive those opiate molecules. But why do we have opiate receptors? Because we have our own opiate system in our bodies. Our internal opiates are called endorphins. Endorphin means endogenous or internal opiate system. Why do we have an opiate system? Because they make us possible to love each other, to relieve pain, and to give us pleasure and reward. Now, those are essential life dynamics: love, connection, caring, pain relief, both physical and emotional pain relief, and pleasure and reward, elation. These are important dynamics. That's where the opiate addiction develops in people who didn't have those qualities enough in their lives. If you look at the stimulant addictions like crystal meth or cocaine, they work on a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is an essential chemical for curiosity, for vitality, for learning. In other words, the addictions, the drug addictions and the behavior addictions are developed in parts of the brain that are essential for life. And so once you, for whatever reason, for example, the pornography addict, it's not pornography that they're addicted to as such. What they're addicted to is getting that hit of dopamine when they feel alive and vital and excited and turned on. Why don't they feel that way naturally? Because something happened to them. Those brain circuits are meant to develop. The human brain develops in interaction with the environment so that the circuits of the brain and the chemistry of the brain is not just genetically determined, it's the environment acting on the genes. And if the early environment is hurtful or not supportive enough, those parts of the brain don't develop properly. And then they're very prone to addiction. And that's why it's so difficult to give it up, because it's wired. Now, of course, the cell phone companies and all the internet gaming, they know how to tap into the addictive parts of the brain. In fact, they design that way. So a lot of kids these days, when they're given cell phones too early, they become addicted. They literally become addicted.
I was wondering about your thoughts on this, because scrolling and screens is just a very hot potato now in Norway as well. And more and more parents are putting their foot down and saying no and postponing smartphones and apps. And they're working very hard to raise the age limits on TikTok and those kind of apps. So what do you think about this, and what could society and we as parents as well do to prevent damage?
Look, first of all, we have to realize, like I said before, these devices are designed to be addictive. Mm-hmm. They're programmed that way, and they're incredibly good at it.
Yeah.
If I was raising kids today, if I could do my parenting over again, well, when my kids were small, there were no cell phones, but I wouldn't even let a screen near them.
No.
You know, not until they're old enough to handle it. It's like you can drink alcohol, but you wouldn't give alcohol to a 4-year-old. No. Why would you give them another addictive material or device? You know, and so I would delay it as long as possible. I would not permit cell phones in schools, kindergartens, you know. I would not give it to them at all. I would have them, one of the essential needs of the human child is free play out in nature. This is not play. This does not engage the playful parts of the brain. It engages the addictive parts of the brain. And there's lots of research on these kids who get cell phones and devices and screens too early. You do brain scans on them. The parts of the brain that have to do with sociality and rational thinking and imagination are actually impaired. This has been shown on brain scans. So we're actually causing brain damage to our kids.
Yeah, and you can't reverse this, right?
Well, it's much more I never say can't. No. I've seen people reverse severe addictions of all kinds. I've seen people go all kinds of changes. I never say never, but it becomes really difficult.
Yeah, you have to wire the brain all over.
Yeah, it's much harder later on.
Yeah.
Look, 2 weeks ago, my summer holiday, I took a 2-week digital vacation. I was off cell phone, email, internet, computer. And I noticed myself still grabbing the cell phone several times a day. And And I think, what am I doing? There's nothing on it. It's an airplane mode, but the automatic habit,
Yeah.
the muscle memory, it was still there, even though there's nothing that I could get from it. That's how powerful it is.
And that's to conscious adults, right?
That this is the conscious 80-year-old. No,
Yeah. So for kids, it's how can we expect them to
yeah,
stand
they
up
can't.
against this? They have no chance. Like, yeah.
They can't. And there's one more thing, which is that if you look at how people evolved, children were around adults the whole day, so they're related to adults. There were other kids around, but the nurturing adults were always present, so that kids look to adults. In our society, when our kids don't see their adults most of the day, they just see each other. They don't see their parents. They relate more to each other. Now they're getting, that's another book that I helped to write.
Yeah.
Um,
Hold
but
on to your kids.
hold on to kids, yeah. But in our society, kids now look to each other. When we give them the cell phone, it means that even when they're with us, they're not with us. They're still with their peers. And you try and take a kid off their cell phone, you're dealing with an addict. Withdrawal and rage and denial and hostility. It's like I've worked with addicts. I know what it's like.
Yeah. What should society do? What can society do you think? As should these, the developers and the people who make these apps and sell these apps, how much responsibility should they take? Who is responsible, really? Do you think?
Well, so there's so many aspects to that, but let's begin with the basics. Um, we talked about addictions being rooted in emotional pain and trauma. That can already begin in the womb. The emotional states of the parent, the mother, affect the brain chemistry of the child. So the first thing is, let's take care of pregnant mothers.
Yeah, and you write about that very
Yeah,
thoroughly
yeah,
in The Myth of Normal. Yeah.
yeah. So when I was trained to be a doctor, looking after pregnant women, I was trained to take their blood pressure, weigh them, measure the uterus, the heartbeat of the baby, and so on. Nobody ever told me, how about asking about how you doing emotionally?
Stress levels.
How much stress do you have? What support do you have? So that's a big thing. In other words, the more support we give to pregnant mothers, the calmer and the more synchronized the baby's brain will be.
Yeah.
Then there's birthing practices and how we give birth, which is a whole other issue. I won't even go into it now, but we're doing so much damage by the way we bring babies into the world, medicalized, technologized, mechanized. You then what kind of support do young parents get, and what kind of advice do young parents get? Because most of the advice to young parents these days is how to control the behavior of the child, not about how to meet the emotional needs of the child. And it's a big difference because I can control a child's behavior by hitting them. That'll control their behavior. That's an extreme example, but it'll do a lot of damage. So the question we need to ask is not how to control the child's behavior, but how do we meet the child's emotional needs so that they look to us for guidance about how to behave.
Yeah.
So just the other, then there's the stress on parents. Now I know in Norway there's much more generous parental leave after than there is in North America, which is a good thing. Um, when kids go to daycare, not just their physical needs, but their emotional needs need to be taken care of. The kids who are troubled, rather than being, and they act out their troubles through lack of attention or aggression or bullying or hyperactivity, rather than being punished, they need to be supported. And they need to be understood that their behaviors and their acting out is a sign of emotional distress. So they don't need control. They need guidance, but they need a lot of emotional support. Now, communities. I don't know what I don't know enough about Norway, but how's the loneliness thing going on in Norway? Because in most of the Western world, there's an increasing erosion of community and neighborhood, and people are more and more lonely.
Yeah.
Which is a big driver of addiction. So society needs to address all that. As far as the manufacturers of these devices, well, I mean, what do we do with drug pushers? You know, but let's take a more reasonable example, cigarettes. Cigarette companies are no longer allowed to advertise, and then they're not allowed to sell to children and so on. So there needs to be some limits. I mean, obviously, cell phones technology can be wonderful things. I mean, we're using it right now. We're using technology right now. You're in Norway. I don't know how many thousands of kilometers away in Vancouver, Canada, 10,000, 15,000 kilometers. But we can have this conversation. That's wonderful. So it's not a question of getting rid of the technology, but of putting limits on it.
You talked a little bit about your personal addictions. How did you manage it? How did you cope with it? And you also in the book write about the distinction between sobriety and abstinence.
Yeah,
Can you say a
yeah,
little bit about that?
sure. Well, first of all, to cope with an addiction, you have to understand what it's about. So my work addiction, what was that all about? Um, for reasons which I'm not going to go into now, but it's in my books. I got the message very early in life that I wasn't wanted. You know, if you ever, and we get these messages before we have conscious thoughts. So the emotional messages that we get in the first months are embedded in our brain without even recalling it, because the recollection is not there yet. But the emotional memory is in the brain and in the body. So if I have a sense of not being wanted, then one way to deal with it is to go to medical school. And now they're going to want you all the time. So every time somebody's sick, they want you. When they're dying, they want you. When they're being born, they want you. When there's a crisis, they want you. Hey, I'm a very important person. But because that sense of self acceptance is lacking, and because I don't really believe that I'm worthwhile, I have to keep proving it and proving it and proving it. And the more you get, the more you want it. So that's what it's about. So how you have to deal with it is I have to find my own sense of worth that has nothing to do with my work. That I'm a worthwhile human being just because I'm a human being, and that you are, and everybody is. So that means we have to deal with the wounds that we received in childhood, and not mistake ourselves for those wounds. It's hard, And I mean the work one is, a few years ago, you have that book there behind you, "Not Krukpen's your name," and the body says no. A few years ago, my wife said to me, "You've written a book called When the Body Says No. Now you should write one because when the wife says no," because she says, "I'm not putting with us anymore." So, I had to make a decision. Does this relationship matter to me? Or do I rather just be out there working all the time? So, it's a constant mm, tension because I love the work that I do. But at the same time, it can become harmful in ways that I talked about. So I have to realize where that drive came from. I have to find a source of worthiness within myself that's not based on what other people think of me and what I do in the world. And then I choose to do the work that I want to do, but not be consumed by it. So that's the process, and it takes a while sometimes. Now, the difference sobriety and abstinence. Um, let's say when I was having my compact disc shopping addiction, it was severe. Sometimes I'd spend thousands of dollars a day and not because I love the music. I love the music, but it's not the love of music that was wrong. It was the need to acquire more and more. It doesn't matter how much I had to run back to the store and get more. That's an addiction. Um, at a certain point, I had to recognize that it was doing more harm than good. And that was causing me to ignore my family and to sometimes even ignore my work, you know. So I have to really be honest about the cost of it to me, and to also realize it doesn't matter how many more records I get, I wasn't any happier.
Oh.
In fact, I was less happy. You know.
Do you still have them, all of them, the compact discs? I always wondered.
I have a lot of them, and God, of course, has a little joke because I just turned 80 and my hearing is getting poorer. So I don't enjoy the music as much as I used to.
No.
And so God's little joke is, okay, little fellow, you thought you'd get all these discs, and when you retired, you listen to them all. uh, well, I can still enjoy it, but it's no longer the same. Yeah, but I still have them and I still love the music. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not shopping anymore.
No. You've bought your last compact disc. Do they sell them anymore?
Probably. I've given away a lot of them. I've sold a lot of them. I may buy, I don't know. I haven't bought one for years.
No. But you have Grieg.
Oh, yeah, of course I have Grieg.
Yeah.
Grieg's piano music. I have his symphonic music, Peer Gynt, of course,
So if you were to sum up your book about addiction in the realm of hungry ghosts,
yeah,
what did you hope to accomplish by writing the book? What is your most prominent wish when it comes to addiction?
When I first began to write that book, my only intention was to write an interesting book about my experience working with these hardcore drug addicts with their HIV and their hepatitis and their overdoses and their challenges and their lives. But then I realized nobody has ever written a book explaining the neurobiology of addiction, how we talked about it, how the brain develops an interaction with the environment, and how trauma affects the brain, and how that trauma that affects the brain then leads to addiction. Nobody had actually put that together before. I was surprised. I was amazed. So the book became much more than just stories. Lots of stories in the book, lots of interesting stories. But it's really about how human addiction is. To go back to our initial conversation, how addiction is really an escape from pain. And to understand addiction, we have to understand human pain. And to help people leave addiction behind, we have to heal their wounds. We have to help heal their pain, or help them deal with the pain in ways that are not self-destructive. Because life brings pain to all of us, and we have to learn how to be with the pain without having to escape from it. And as children, you can't. No. And so the reason so many of us look to addiction to soothe our pain is because in childhood, when we had pain, we were alone with it and there was nobody there to support us. So we have to support each other. We have to be compassionate to ourselves and also to other people who are facing the challenge of addiction. So that was the intention in the end, is to bring together all the science in a way that people can understand, and all the insight and the stories of individual people into one package, so that people really understand what this is all about, what a human, general, common, universal problem this is, and how we need compassion combined with science to deal with it.
Do you think we can do it? Do you think we can change our society anytime soon?
Well, I see a lot of problems ahead. In many ways, things are getting more difficult for people. But I also see so much more movement towards healing. So in the long term, I'm optimistic. In the short term, I think things are going to be very difficult, but I believe in human beings. And look, I'm just about to go on a speaking tour of Europe starting in a few days. And everywhere I go, thousands of people are coming to hear me. I mean, everywhere, whether it's Holland or England or Slovakia, you know. And not just me, but other people who are talking about trauma and healing and so on. Why? Because people are waking up. People are waking up to the pain in our lives and the trauma in our lives and the need to heal. So that makes me optimistic. So on the one hand, no, I don't think it's going to be short term, but I do believe in people. I do believe in healing. I do believe in the human potential. So in that sense, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, that's really good to hear.
Thank you.
I think that's all we have time for. Dr. Gabor Maté, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Well, my pleasure. Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you. Thank you.